Filling in as the moderator tonight due to whoever was supposed to do it not being here. So a few things. First of all, the candidates were all sent the rules earlier today, so I'm not going to needlessly repeat them here. Essentially, we have about 4 categories of questions tonight. There's going to be about 20 minutes, I think, per question. The questions were prepared. The questions were prepared by Sydney, the election commissioner. I, as the moderator, will only ask questions if I think a follow-up is needed, or if there's something that I think the candidate would be better to explain a little bit more in depth. For the candidates that are debating tonight, Sydney will be keeping time, and she will hold up her hand to indicate you have 5 seconds left in your answer. And then she'll also indicate that you should stop speaking after that time has expired. We will allow rebuttal if you are specifically called out in the answer, but otherwise it's just each candidate will get to answer each question. I think that covers everything. Oh, the other thing is there's only 1 microphone, so all the candidates will need to pass the microphone, and I guess I will yell the question so that we can all hear it. I don't think I'm missing anything. So if each of the candidates want to make their way to the front, we will start. So I think we're sitting alphabetically, so by last name.
Hi everyone, thank you for having us tonight. My name is Adia Rue. I am a junior studying medical laboratory science, and I was interested in joining student government this year because when I first came on campus as a transfer student, I didn't really see the presence of student government on campus, and I wanted to get involved just because of my past experience being involved in student government. I decided to join Dadi Mansuri's team because I believe his vision really aligned with mine about being present, student government being present on campus, and also being engaged with the students on campus.
Hi everyone, thank you. My name is Madhuri Belkala, and I have the privilege to be here today as the vice presidential candidate for Inspire UI. Throughout my time at Iowa, I've observed the realities of student life on campus and invested myself in making positive change. I've worked alongside strong student leaders to begin student organizations from the ground up, increase engagement with multicultural initiatives, promote academic support for all students, and ultimately help foster a welcoming environment for all Hawkeyes at the University of Iowa. As I approach the end of my time at Iowa, I decided to join student government and run for this position to give back to an institution which has given me so much. Alexia and I see potential for UISG to better the student experience here at Iowa, and we have brought together a diverse team who's determined to represent you and make change through transparency, sustainable support, and collaboration. The combination of Alexia's expertise in UISG, my skill through outside campus organizations, and the collective wisdom of our ticket make us dedicated to Inspire UI.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Henry. I'm a junior studying sociology and ethics and public policy with minors in political science and Spanish. I'm super excited to be here and talk to you about why I'm qualified to be vice president and Ignite Iowa's awesome platform and our awesome team. On campus, I'm involved as the current committee chair for sustainability at UISG, and I'm also, for the last 2 years, have served as a resident assistant. This year I'm actually in Cat Lit, so welcome, make yourself at home. And then I'm also in dance marathon, so I'm really proud to be involved in various student organizations and have been able to serve students through those roles. And I'm very excited to prove to you tonight that I'm qualified to serve in this role, and that our expertise, my expertise, and our team's passions will all combine to serve you the best we can do.
So the question is, in a 2016 University of Iowa survey, 52% of students reported worrying about their financial situation often, and 24% of students indicated that they were very concerned about financing their education for the next year. With the prospect of tuition increases over the next 5 years, how do you plan to address the financial hardship that many students face?
We, UI Charge Party, plan to address those financial situations by allowing students to be a part of going to the state capitol with UISG to express their situations, because overall the state capitol is what makes the cuts as well. So it's really important that our students' voices are heard at the state level, and we want to advocate for students by allowing them to go to the state capitol and listen to, be heard by our state legislators and representatives.
Affordability is a really important topic, and our team is dedicated to making sure that every student can have an affordable experience at the University of Iowa. To us, this begins with starting with strong relationships with our legislators and being able to advocate for not only keeping our tuition, either freezing our tuition or advocating for reduced tuition. But on top of that, it's also important that we can advocate for resources that exist at the University of Iowa to make sure that students have equitable and affordable ways to get textbooks, such as textbook donation drives, open resources, and advocating to make sure that the university buys into these relationships with our libraries, so students have better access to these educational resources. Further, we think it's really important to make sure that the process to graduation is affordable for all Hawkeyes. We want to make sure to start working with the clothing closet to develop a loan program for graduation gowns, because that's very important that every Hawkeye has an equitable path to graduation.
Hi, so clearly one of the biggest expenses of being a college student at Iowa and just in general is tuition. It's very expensive, several $1,000s a year. A lot of people are lucky enough to get scholarships to either cover or help with that. And there are federal loans. People often have to put themselves into debt just to pay for their education. The administration often talks about the pride of having one of the lowest rates of tuition in the Big Ten and across the country, which is something to be very proud of, let's be clear, but that still doesn't mean that it's affordable to attend college, and it still doesn't mean that it's an issue that we don't need to focus on. So like the two candidates also said, thank you, this is a really important idea. We're going to focus on making sure that we're involved with the state government. Every senator and every executive in UISG should have a personal connection with their representative in Iowa, and the Iowa legislature should know that we are going to be at their door, knocking and making sure that they're thinking of students in those problems.
The Iowa legislature has decreased funding for the University of Iowa over several years, pressuring tuition to increase at the university. Still, the University of Iowa will be impacted by cuts to the budget. How do you plan to engage the legislature with regard to state appropriations, and are there other ways you intend to engage with the legislature on the topic of affordability? And what about the Board of Regents as well?
Absolutely. So the relationship with the students at the University of Iowa that we have with the Board of Regents and with the legislature is really important, and we recognize that. To us, that means continuing to advocate and sending representatives from student government to the Capitol each week to maintain those relationships and make sure that we have connections so we're able to advocate for affordability. But on top of that, we want to work with the Board of Regents and our legislators to bring them back here to campus so every student has the opportunity to advocate for themselves and to have the accessible option to share what's important to you and advocate and show legislators what we need and that we all want cheaper tuition and that it matters to all of us. So it's really important to us that that's accessible for all students and that we can work with the Board of Regents to make that happen.
So there are three really important things with advocating in the state and at the Board of Regents in terms of affordability. One, we need to make sure that UISG is involved in making sure students are civically engaged, because students should be voting for legislators that will fight for affordability and that will fight for students. If we're not voting, we have no voice in that, and we're giving up the ability to be able to influence that and tell the state government that we want them to value us and we want them to hear our stories, In addition, we need to institutionalize regular meetings with legislators. They've done, the GR team, government relations, that team has been doing great this year at institutionalizing those and making sure they know every single week there will be representatives from UISG there sharing student stories. And then with the Board of Regents, right now that group of people is not representative of college students or the people that are fighting for affordability, and so we need to make sure we're actively talking with them so they understand that students cannot afford a tuition increase.
In order for students to be engaged, they first have to know that they are allowed and able to go to the state capitol. We are wanting to do online polls for students so that each week that new students can be introduced to state legislators and representatives and get their voices heard. I think that is the most important part about this. In order for them to truly hear our stories and understand that it is very difficult, to afford college today. And so we want to imply that so that each student has that ability to voice their opinions.
Safety and safe on this campus and also help with their success. Student dollars should be going towards things that are directly going to affect that. $2 for every student will drastically increase the reach of university counseling services and of the mental health initiatives on campus. And things like that, students cannot be successful in classes and student
Want to accomplish at the University of Iowa and to ensure that they are healthy, and in order to do so we need to hear their voices and ask them where they want to see their funds go to, ideally. And in order to do that, we first must reach out to them and ask them what it is that they are wanting to see on campus.
Because our live stream viewers cannot hear the questions. Hopefully the live stream people will be able to hear the questions now. I'll just sit up here, but the timing will still be done by Sydney at the table. So I'd like to ask a follow-up question of each of you. It's the same question for all of you. If you could talk about... Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. This is a really good question because the student activity fee is a reason that every single student should vote. For those of you who don't know, the student activity fee is the $1.8 million the student government is in charge of allocating, and it affects every single one of us. And like Sarah and the other candidates mentioned, I don't think it's fair to pit priorities and decide like one agenda that everything should be decided upon. But what I do think is important is that we're allocating this fee with transparency and making sure all students know where this funding is going. To us, that means having weekly update videos where we say, this is what funding's been spent on, this is how we intend to spend it. On top of that, I think it's important to have equitable standards for how we're funding student organizations and people who come to us to ask for money. In my experience in the organization for this last semester, I've experienced a lot of interesting standards for funding, and I think that's something that we should work on as an organization.
Sorry about that. So my follow-up question to each of you is, aside from affordability, what public policy issues do you think are the biggest influencer on students in the state of Iowa right now?
So I might mess up the number of this bill because I don't exactly remember it, but I believe it's SSB 1241. I'm getting some nods. So this is actually really, really important. It will affect students every single day. It is a bill that makes it a lot more difficult for college students to vote by taking away the ability to have voting locations and polling locations in like state-funded buildings, which at a public university is pretty much we're in a state-funded building right now. It also limits the hours that people can vote on election day, and that, in my opinion, is a direct attack on college students that legislators do not want us voting because they know that we will vote to make their jobs harder by asking for more affordable tuition, by asking for more state funding, and by holding them accountable for the decisions that a lot of times when we don't pay attention and we don't vote, they can just get away with.
I also agree with the VP candidate. It's very important that the state legislators hear our voice, and so in order to do that, we do need to vote, and we need to have access to voting on campus.
I also resonate with the ideas that the other two candidates have shared, and I think that civic engagement is really important. We completely support the idea, but I'm going to touch on a couple others just to bring some perspective or variety. Another thing that we think is important is advocating for the move-in checklist on the state legislature, which affects all off-campus students, which is approximately 70% of our population, and advocates for these students to have good agreements with their landlords and make sure that they're getting their security deposit back. Students are often cheated out of their security deposits, and while that's not that much money for each individual student, it adds up, and landlords are making a lot of money off of us, and that affects so many students on this campus. So I think that's important in addition to civic engagement, because that is definitely a really important topic.
All right, we're going to move into some topics on justice and equity, and we'll start with Adio and the first question. The question is, what would you do to make campus more accessible for students with disabilities? How would you make services and accommodations more readily available?
To answer that question, I would advocate for the student disability service to be moved somewhere that is actually accessible to students on campus, and also engage with the students and see what resources they would like on campus because it's for them.
This is a topic that our team has been having a lot of conversations about, and we think it's a really important issue to discuss. We have several initiatives that we believe will help address students with disabilities and the problems they face on our campus. That starts with including closed captioning in all university classes, online courses, so students are able to read along. It goes on to having accessible desks in classrooms. So we have old university buildings where sometimes you have to like shove your way into a desk. I think you all know what I'm talking about. And that's not accessible to everyone. And it's important that we advocate for change that we see that will affect students. On top of that, I agree with your sentiment that we need to work with the Student Disabilities Office and with SDS to make sure that they're in a location that is accessible, and that we work with them to work with students in the classroom so they can communicate with their professors about their needs. Further, I think it's important that we listen to the student leaders and student organizations that are centered around this advocacy to make sure that we're doing the change that they want to see.
Something that is really vital to supporting students with disabilities on campus is working to make sure that their voices are heard and wanted in conversations in UISG and administration all across campus. One thing that Noel and I actually learned from some students of the student organization, UI Students for Disability Advocacy and Awareness, when we were talking with them, they were sharing stories of the disability, like the reporting form for accessibility concerns. This student had filled out an accessibility concern that was severely limiting their ability to be successful on this campus, and it took 2 to 3 months to even get a response email saying that they had received the complaint. Not even that they had a plan to accomplish it or that they wanted to work on that issue, but simply that they had received their email. And so we definitely, one of the things on our platform is to make a universal location for all of those accessibility forms, and then making sure that they're all answered in a timely and effective manner.
All right, the next question in this section is, what does representation mean to you?
I think this is a really important question, and I'm glad that it was brought up tonight. I think representation is often described as having a seat at the table and having every identity represented in a room. And I know a lot of talk has been going on as Alexia and I are running as 2 women of color, and that meaning that we are representation of women of color. And I want to take this moment to say that that is not the sentiment that we are here for. Representation is not about having people in a room. While that's important and it's great to have voices in a room, it's also about recognizing that it's important to uplift all voices. Knowing what it's like to be marginalized or to feel that way means that you know what it's like to not have your voice heard, and you know what it's like to need to listen to all voices and want to uplift students in any way possible. So representation to me means having people, yes, from a diversity of background, diversity of thought, diversity of experiences, but also having students who want to advocate to uplift all voices on the campus.
This is something that our team is really passionate about in terms of reaching out into different communities across campus that have been underrepresented in UISG and as student leaders in the past and continue to be underrepresented. But there's a really important and cool saying that kind of has to do with this. Is to make sure that in everything you do, think about who's at the table, who's not at the table, and then who doesn't even know the table exists. So we need to be working to make sure UISG is as representative as possible with diverse identities and experiences, and then also who we're missing, who we're clearly not inviting to the table, and then the students that don't know what UISG is, don't know we allocate their student dollars, don't know we're making decisions to fund or not fund their student organizations, and don't know that they have a voice on this campus.
I believe representation is very important for all students, and one of our initiatives is to add additional consistency seats in student government for non-traditional students and also transfer students, so their voices can be heard as well. I feel like our current UISG does not do a good job with that, and so you are leaving out voices that are also important in our community.
so this question will start with Sarah. How can you help to make campus a more welcoming and inclusive environment for students from historically underrepresented groups and identities?
One thing that I'm really passionate about working on is making sure we have UISG and the administration has a good response and a planned response for hate and bias incidents. Unfortunately, that occurs a lot on our campus, whether to individuals or to entire groups of people and identities. And so we need to make sure that the Vice President and the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion have a response protocol for that, because right now they actually don't. So every time a hate incident or an act of bias occurs on campus, it's basically just a chain of emails and meetings trying to figure out what to do. We need to have student support in making sure that they're involved in those conversations so that they can contribute and let administration know what that plan should be, because students are the ones on campus seeing those signs of hate, seeing that graffiti, and feeling those acts of bias against them and their identities. So we really need to make sure that that is prioritized.
I believe that students should be allowed to voice their voices all over campus, no matter who you are. It's very important to do that. And also what she was going off of, it's very important to do things like that on campus.
Marginalization and microaggressions are something that affects students on our campus every single day. It's not something that we always recognize or that students even notice right away, but it affects you, and then at the end of the day, it makes a big difference. Something we want to do to change this is implicit bias training for all faculty and staff. We think it's really important that faculty and staff are trained and that they recognize what they're saying and how that affects students. We all go to class, and that's why we're here, we're students, so that will affect every single one of us. On top of that, we think it's important to diversify UCS, the University Counseling Services, and faculty and staff on campus. Diversifying the people we're around is important, and making sure we're retaining people at the University of Iowa. If we see representation like that disappearing, that means that we need to continue advocating for people to stay at the University of Iowa and provide student voices in that as well. It's also important to uplift voices of students who feel this and not just insert UISG in these conversations, but include others as well.
All right, we're going to move on to the health and safety portion of the questions. So just for the audience and those watching at home, this is a trigger warning that the question will discuss sexual assault. So according to the 2017 Speak Out survey about sexual assaults on campus, 17% of UI female undergraduates and 6% of male undergraduates reported having been raped since enrolling at the University of Iowa. A similar number have experienced attempted rape. An additional key finding was that alcohol was used by the perpetrator and the victim in about half of assaults. What specific actions can UISG take to prevent sexual assault on our campus?
So preventative actions that can be taken is to let students know that, consumption of alcohol is not okay on campus, and for that reason, I think that would help with the sexual assault rate and how that works, and also just having that representation of sexual assault people and letting their voices be heard and feeling comfortable coming to UISG to talk about better ways in dealing with those issues.
This is an issue that's really important to me personally. I'm a research assistant here at the University of Iowa, and my research is focused on sexual aggression on college campuses. I think it's really important that we continue to advocate for education about sexual assault and what happens on college campuses and the reality. So that means collaborating with continuing the It's On Us campaign and continuing to advocate for UISG to be involved in those conversations. One specific initiative we have that we think will help with this also is collaborating with University Housing and Dining to provide open residence halls as safe spaces for students who may be affected by domestic or dating violence or may be potential victims of that. We think allowing students to have a place to go to if they are facing something at home that they don't want to go to is really important, and we as members of UISG should be advocating for safe spaces for students.
It's really important to fund all of the initiatives on campus that are working to prevent sexual assault and provide education to students on sexual assault prevention and education. So we're supporting resources like the Rape Victim Advocacy Program, Women's Resource and Action Center, Monsoon, the hotlines. All of those things need to be supported with full force because that's where students go when things like this happen to them. They go to their RAs, they go to their friends, they go to those programs. And so we need to be providing proper training and funding to all of those things. In addition, we need to advocate for students with the administration to not roll back any of the Title IX regulations that we have on campus for sexual assault cases to go unreported, and we need to make sure that our university is committed to protecting students and survivors in that way.
Share program that already exists to make sure that Hawkeyes can get food on the go and not necessarily, sitting down in the dining halls. For those of you who don't know, the meal share program is a way that students can donate their leftover meals. And at the end of the year, a lot of students have extra flex meals that they paid for and they don't use. And I think this is a great way that we can advocate for students to get food that other students are already paying for.
I definitely agree. The food pantry and the Hawkeye Meal Share program are two amazing initiatives that have really made a positive impact on this campus for students facing food insecurity. And another really important thing to think about is being very persistent with dining to advocate for students facing food insecurity. Actually, a friend of mine, another student, the other day was tweeting back at our Ignite Twitter account, talking about how there should be a meal plan for students facing food insecurity. Because the Hawkeye Meal Share program has a similar goal where you can get free food, but that's not as sustainable every single day, every meal of the year. And so it would be awesome to advocate for a program where students can work with the Dean of Students, which is where they currently go for the Hawkeye Meal Share program, and work to have an entire meal plan that is the same quality, the same resources, but is cheaper for those students that happen to be facing food insecurity at that time.
One of the initiatives that we have is to have to-go boxes at dining halls that all students are able to get, because a lot of food is wasted in dining halls, and we want that to be used in a more efficient way by giving it to students who may face food insecurities and allowing them to have access to those foods and stuff like that. Also, to notify them when dining halls are having leftover food, so they can come in and get those to-go boxes, and also continue supporting and funding the food pantry and the meal share program.
this question. I'll let people scoot out. Okay, so the question is, how can you ensure that health-based services offered by the university through programs such as student health, university counseling services, or quick care are held to high standards of quality and availability?
That's a really good question. UISG has a lot of power to advocate for students in funding those programs and even just supporting them. One of the roles of the resolutions that we can pass and write in Senate is to just support something on campus, and it is kind of a way to say that this is good for students, we are excited about it, and we want it to happen. And so making sure that we're present with funding and those either resolutions or just verbal support, being in meetings saying that things are good for students, and then also ensuring that the facilities and programs offered by Student Health, UCS, places like that, are diverse and representative, because those kind of services, it's really easy to be good for one group of people and call it good and not want to work on any more advocacy, but they need to be expanded. They need to be expanded to all different types of students, first-gen students, non-traditional students, students in different races. You need to make sure that those resources are allocated equitably.
It's important for students to have access to those resources and allowing them to be able to get to those resources. So it's important to put something in place where if they need to go to quick care, we can help and provide transportation to quick care. Currently, like students who work in housing and dining, if they have an accident at work, they are taken to quick care and they're provided transportation. And I feel like all students should have the same accessibility to those type of resources.
I agree with the other two candidates. It's important for student government to have a seat at the table when talking with student health, counseling services, and other services on our campus. Student health is something that affects every student every single day, like almost everything we've discussed today. But it's important for that reason that we are sitting down and listening to what affects students and what students want. For that reason, we want to have a feedback form where students are able to respond to us openly and all the time and share those ideas and responses and feedback that they have anonymously. One specific initiative that we have with mental health services on our campus is expanding the Let's Talk Hawks program, which is like 15-minute drop-in counseling sessions at the residence halls. We think it's important to expand those to the library, IMU, and other accessible locations on campus, because it's important that these services are accessible and equitable for all of our students and everyone knows about them and has access to them.
I'd like to ask a follow-up in this category, and we'll start with video. So recently, the current administrations of UISG and GPSG were asked to consider and then supported an increase in the mental health fee. I'm curious if you could tell everyone what your process as a leader of student government would be to go about approving or disapproving a fee increase.
I think it's very important that we have resources for mental health, because a lot of students are affected with mental health, and for that reason I believe that more funding should go towards mental health so no student feels left out, and as well we would go about that by having students' voices be heard about how important it is to have mental health resources here on campus.
I think it's very, very important that we do our research and we think hard before increasing or decreasing any type of fee that students pay into at the University of Iowa. $1 or $2 for one student may be no big difference, but for another student it can be a big deal. So I think it's vital that student government does their research and talks to many communities, talks about how we're going to spend this money if we do this increase, where the money is going, what specific action steps will be taken, and how feasible that those programs are, that they will be executed with the intended purposes. It's very important that we take the time as an organization to consider what we're doing, since it affects every student, and make sure that that impact is worth it, because this is a great increase that we passed recently, and I think that we did our due diligence in that work, and it's important that we continue doing that when we advocate for such increases in fees.
Like Madhuri said, it's really important to consider how the financial burden of an additional fee will affect students. In the case of the mental health fee, that was about $2 for every student, and it would expand the mental health resources on this campus. That reach would be expanded so much that as a senator, I knew that low cost to each individual student would be so important in expanding those services. So it's really important to look at if the fee is, like you said, it's reasonable, and if it affects someone's health and safety and ability to be on this campus and be successful as a Hawkeye, that is absolutely something we should advocate for. And then we should definitely work to be more involved in the process on fees. Often the student voice and UISG's presence at meetings is asked very late in the in that process. Often they're just looking for confirmation, and we cannot be pushed into just confirming things because we've been asked when it's almost done.
All right, the last portion of the debate tonight will discuss your experience and your ideas. And we'll start with Madhuri on this first question. What issue has not been prioritized by UISG in the past that you will make sure is a priority?
We'll start with a little background. So I just joined student government this semester. It's my first semester in the organization, and I've had a really interesting time. I think the one issue that has not been necessarily held to its highest standard, and that is really important to both Lexi and I and our whole team for this upcoming year, is transparency and accountability within student government. Like we've mentioned several times throughout this debate, lots of students do not know that student government exists, further what their purpose is and what we do. And we're in charge of something that affects every single student, and I think there's several action steps we can take to make sure that this is better. This includes providing updates so students know how we're funding and what projects are being passed along, having equitable standards for how we fund things, and making sure that we're not prioritizing certain communities over others. It's really important that these conversations are had and that we're holding each other accountable to these standards by making sure that this is all public so everyone can hold us accountable as well.
An area that UISG has a lot of room to improve in is communication and representation and being genuine in that effort. We tend to think that we have that room of 50 to 70 people and that's it, that's the student voice. And what each person's individual idea is and what their concerns are represents the entire student body. And we need to understand that that's not true. If we're going to say we're representing students, if we're going to say we've talked to constituents about projects, that needs to be true. One, we need to work to actually hear people's voices and know what they feel on issues and not just take our opinions and our experiences as the only student experience.
I believe that student government could be more present to the student body. In order to do that, they need to allow students to know who they are and be present in the community. An initiative that we are wanting to put in place is have informational videos for students, especially new students, and have those displayed during syllabus week, and have those weekly update videos so that students can really know who their leaders and representatives are and have that access to them.
All right, I think we're back to Sarah for the first round here. How can you leverage at least 2 of your top strengths from StrengthsFinder to be a better leader. If you don't happen to know your top 5 strengths, you can tell us what you think 2 of them are, and then answer it that way.
First of all, I know my top 5 strengths. Do not act like I don't. 2 of them that I'm really proud of are strategic and adaptability. When I took it freshman year, I was like, oh, I'm strategic and adaptable. But I'm really excited to use those to lead in many ways. Strategic, one, making sure that we're talking with students, following through on plans we create, and making sure that our goals are representative of what UISG and what the student body wants. Oftentimes, it's very hard to jump into an initiative and a project without a goal and a plan. And as a committee chair this year, I've tried to work to make sure that people know where they're at with initiatives and know they can strategically, work on those and follow through on that plan and accomplish that goal. And then adaptability, it's definitely, we need to be able to change. We need to be able to accept that we're not always going to be right, and we're not always going to know what students want right away, so we need to be adaptable, and I will do that by leading as vice president.
I would say my 2 strong strengths would be leadership skills and also being ambitious. My background, a little bit about me, is I served as president of student government at my previous institution, which is Marshalltown Community College. And through that experience, I really learned how to advocate for the students and how to be a true leader. And over the time, I really worked on my leadership skills and also being ambitious, being a first-generation student, a woman of color, a refugee. I feel like it's my role, it's my my drive to why I want to be your guys' VP candidate.
2 of my strengths that I'd like to touch on from StrengthsFinder are empathy and achiever. I think that empathy is one of the most important strengths that any individual and student leader on this campus can have. We all want to be leaders and we all want to make change, but nothing happens and that goes nowhere when we can't build good relationships and start with a team that wants to work together. To me, empathy means good relationship building and inspiring other student leaders like we've done with our team to want to make change, to want to make positive change, and to be motivated to carry that through on their own. Achiever means making sure what we do and what we set out to do happens. That's really important to me, and it means doing that through specific steps, having a plan, and making sure that we execute what we're here to do.
All right, so the next question, we've kind of touched on it already, but I will give each candidate an opportunity to respond to the specific question. So some believe that UISG is an organization that lacks transparency. What specific actions would you take to increase the transparency of UISG?
Some specific actions that we would take is having those videos during syllabus week so that students know who their representatives are. That's very vital so that they can see what we do and who we stand for, and that they can come to UISG with any concerns and voice their opinions.
So this is a really important issue, like I discussed before, and we also want to provide weekly updates to make sure everyone knows what's going on. But a couple other steps that we want to take to make sure it's more transparent is updating the website and making sure it's always updated. I joined the organization a while ago and my name and face is still not on the website. So it's important that that's updated so students know what legislation we're passing, who they can contact as part of the organization, and not just like SSB XYZ, but what that means, and making sure like the students can follow along with the live stream and not just watch and not know what's going on. As someone who just joined the organization, I have the perspective and I know what it's like to be on the outside and not understand how to communicate with student government. As a student student organization leader, I've tried to get funding and not known how to go about it. And now that I'm in the organization with the expertise of our team, I believe we have what it takes to make sure that we can improve that communication. On top of that, it's important to make sure we have funding transparency and that people within and outside the organization know what we're doing. Thank you.
So there are a few things that I want to touch on that I scribbled out very messily, so I'll try to read them. But one thing that we want to do is institutionalize the student open access opportunity that was started just recently this year. We often have departments coming in to talk about projects they're working on or student input that they want. And we just started having students being able to come in and talk about issues they're concerned with, tell us if we messed up, talk about funding and their experiences and their stories. So we need to institutionalize that and make sure it continues. I want to give a shout out to our communications team. They work really, really hard. They do a lot. And they have a lot of role in increasing our social media presence so we can make each bill, each decision we have, each legislation, each meeting, to make sure that that's transparent. There are students invited to it, student orgs that are going to be affected by those decisions. They need to be in the room. And then Noel and I also plan to meet with every senator in UISG at the beginning of the year and throughout the year to make sure that they know that what our goals are.
I think we're back to Madhuri. Sorry, I'm losing track. How will you work with other ticket members from different parties if, like in past years, the Senate election is split?
That's a really good question, and just joining the organization,
to talk about what we can do for them and what we need to our organization is cohesive and transparent and equitable.
I can agree with both of what they said. It's very important that we have an established relationship with each and every one of the senators and get to know them and their perspective and ideas. And we want all of them on the table. We also want to be able to talk to them and give them, give them the opportunity to be heard. And we want all of the tickets that are in office to, we want to put all of those initiatives into place as well. So.
All right, the final question of the evening, we'll start with Sarah, is what makes you a unique candidate for Vice President of UISG?
So throughout my time at Iowa, I've had a lot of different experiences and interactions with UISG. My first year I was not involved. I did not feel represented. I didn't know the events they put on. I didn't know what we did. I didn't know that UISG was working for me. My sophomore year, I was involved in UISG as an at-large senator, but to be quite honest with you, I didn't feel very welcomed in the organization. I didn't feel like I had a voice, and a lot of that transparency that UISG struggles with external organizations and communication was happening in the organization as well. And this year in my role as committee chair, I was able to give myself more of a voice, and a lot of the individuals in the organization reached out to me to let me know that that voice was valued. And so I can use all three of those experiences to represent students and know that what we're doing all the time is not communicated to students well. We can always be doing better, and we need to make relationship building within the organization and without an absolute first priority.
Yeah, so the question was, what would make you a unique candidate for vice president of UISG?
I believe something unique about me is having prior experience in being in student government at my previous institution, so I bring a lot of perspective and ideas to the table, and also just having different personality. I'm also a refugee, transfer student, and having those seats in UISG for students and non-traditional students, so all voices can be heard.
So I first came to the University of Iowa because it was super close to home. I'm from Cedar Rapids, the Lions, and I'm really proud to call the University of Iowa my home. My parents now live in Texas, and I really consider this place where I'm meant to be and where I feel at home. Throughout my time at Iowa, I've joined a variety of student organizations. I currently serve as an orientation leader. I'm president of the pre-law fraternity on our campus. I've served on the Homecoming Executive Council, the Indian Student Alliance Executive Board, volunteered across campus, worked on campus, and I've served in a variety of positions. But this year I decided I wanted to join student government because I felt that some of those perspectives needed to be represented in our organization. I think I bring a unique perspective of working with student government from the outside through these other roles, and seeing also the change and potential we have through the members and expertise of members on our team. I think that combining my expertise from outside organizations and institutional knowledge really gives us the potential to make good change next year.
All right, we'll now move into the closing statements from each candidate, starting with Adia.
I hope you guys take the time to really look at UI Charge Party and who we are. We are a very diverse group, and we want all ideas and perspectives at the table. We want to be your representatives, we want to be your leaders, we want to be your friend, and we want to hear your voices and stand for you guys.
I'd like to first thank the moderator and the other candidates today for the opportunity to discuss some of the most important issues affecting students on our campus. I want to thank you all for showing up today and for most importantly engaging with this election at all. UISG serves a critical role on our campus, and as we know, informed voting is key at all levels of government. Getting all perspectives on the topic is crucial because it combines hearing platform initiatives from the vice presidents and concerns from the students. Inspire UI doesn't want to just take over UISG and do a bunch of things with your student dollars because we think that those are the most important things. You're electing people to represent you, to listen to you, and to work with you. We are committed to amplifying your voices on this campus, and for that reason, I encourage you to vote Inspire UI next week. Thank you.
First, thank you all for coming out. It means a lot that you're willing and excited to hear what we have to say, and you want to know about our platforms and why we're qualified for these positions. And then also, this team that we've built is absolutely amazing. Their passion and drive is unlike any other I've ever seen. And we are ready to listen to students, and we're ready to hear what they have to say. We're ready to admit when we're wrong and when we can do better. And we are here to work for students and speak alongside student organizations, off-campus students, first-gen students, absolutely every student on this campus, and we are not here to step on them or over them, and we are going to carry the energy from this campaign that we have with talking to students on the walkway, being on social media, making sure we're as present as possible. We are going to carry that into our administration and create a University of Iowa student government that advocates for every single student on this campus.
All right, thank you all for coming tonight. Let's give one more round of applause to each of the candidates.